I can get started. I thought that I could start by giving you a brief introduction about myself, and then also share with you some of the the schedule basically for the session, and some housekeeping tips, just so that we make it as beneficial as possible. So I want to start by saying good evening to everybody, and my name is Lulu Khazen. I'm a Lebanese entrepreneur, but I've been living in Dubai for close to 20 years now. I've started my career in the corporate world, and then I moved to the startup world in 2009. So I first joined a startup advisory firm and started learning more about the startup world there. And then I launched my own business in 2012, which is nabbish.com, which is the Middle East's first and largest online marketplace, connecting over 100,000 freelancers with businesses. So I sold Nabbish in 2020. And since then, I've been focusing on sharing the learning via my show, Conversations with Lulu, which is a series of interviews with business leaders and entrepreneurs. And I highly, highly recommend that you check it out on my website, conversationswithlulu.com, if you are interested to learn more and to hear stories from extremely successful founders from this part of the world. So, of course, I wanted to thank the Talal and Madih Hazain AUB Innovation Park for inviting me. I want to thank Maha Zwahid and Reem Alamuddin. I'm super excited to be moderating this session. I feel it's incredibly important. And I'm also extremely excited and honored to have met Dr. Michel Naufal, who will be sharing with us his insights from a mental health standpoint. So Dr. Naufal is a mental health professional. He is a clinical psychologist, he's a medical doctor, and he is the vice president of the Middle East Psychological Association. You can learn more about his work via his website, naufalclinics.com. He's a member of several boards and associations, and definitely an extremely busy man. So we really want to thank him for his time.
Well, thank you for having me again. And it's a pleasure as well to be here, especially that this is the first time I would be discussing the mental health aspect in the context of entrepreneurship. So I learned a lot while preparing for this. So that's also a big plus for me, myself as well.
Excellent, excellent. So it's a win-win situation.
Exactly, yes.
So a few things for the people listening to this session. Obviously, the session will be held in English. If there are any clarifications, you can use the Q&A tool, and you can send us all your questions and we will reply to them. I highly encourage you to ask questions at any point where you feel you need to ask through the Q&A tool again, but please make sure that they come from a business context, and please be mindful of everyone who's attending. We will not be answering any personal issues or consulting for personal matters. The session will be an hour long, and we might have possibly a small extension. And I think we will probably start taking Q&A at around 40 minutes, if that's okay with everyone. So without further ado, Dr. Naufal, I think let's start with an easy question. So are entrepreneurs born or bred?
Right. Well, first of all, I believe that any type of personality or skills, characteristics, traits, cognitive mindset is both innate and acquired. In the research that I did before doing this activity today, different sources mentioned different things. But what I was able to gather and to understand that in most sources, they do highlight both aspects, nature and nurture. A lot of people have a predisposition to become entrepreneurs, but for some reasons, maybe their life experiences or their life conditions do not allow them to pursue such venture. And on the other hand, people with a milder predisposition from a cognitive mindset, personality, traits and characteristics, they might have a fertile and a positive and encouraging experiences in their lives. And that would help them, reach certain places that they would have liked to. And at the same time, I believe that this field is very specific, and people ought to know a little bit what to expect, because being predisposed in a good way to becoming an entrepreneur is not enough to actually being a successful one. So I guess we'll cover this in other under other questions.
Yes, I wanted to clarify something though, because what do you mean by some people are predisposed? What do you mean by predisposed?
Right. When we say predisposed in the mental health, we mean that their psychological makeup, their genes, their physiology, there are certain abilities, we'll talk about them, that might be actually innate, because we know that personality traits tend to be inherited, and family members tend to have similar characteristics of their personalities than, let's say, members of different families. So there is a biological and psychological makeup that can be genetically predisposed, and that people are born with such a makeup. But that doesn't mean that they will be able to use that this predisposition in the makeup and reach where they would like to reach.
So for the benefit of those listening and who are entrepreneurs and are probably thinking at this point, do I have this makeup or not? What are some of the traits that you believe are these predisposed, let's say, entrepreneurs, or what are these innate traits that you believe should be there?
Right. Again, like when I was preparing, I saw a big list of characteristics and traits that would be encouraging and helpful for people to reach certain levels in the entrepreneurship world. The few of them that I actually liked and thought they were relevant were the following: attitude, creativity, the ability to make relationships, knowledge, and organization. By attitude, I mean the ability to maintain a certain attitude which is productive and healthy in such a stressful arena. Creativity is also indispensable, because this is a field that requires innovation, requires the ability to have a vision, requires the need for someone to produce something maybe new. Relationships are very important, because at the end of the day, when we know the people who are actually good and helpful for particular startups, those startups tend to do better. This is why I also believe that people who are more extroverted tend to do better in their social life, and they might actually meet people who are the right people to help them in such endeavors. Being organized, I mean by that, like being disciplined, because this is a very stressful world, and if it's impossible to actually make it on the long term if a person were not disciplined and organized. And also, we need to have the know-how, the skills, and the knowledge in order to be able to apply those to reach a successful point.
Okay, so attitude, creativity, relationships, and being disciplined and being organized. These are some of the traits that you believe predispose you to become successful, potentially successful at such an endeavor.
Yes, these are the traits that I noticed were common in different sources that I looked at.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, again, I'm sure a lot of people in this room are experimenting with startups. Potentially, some of them might be in it already in the deep. Some of them are just dipping their toes and starting up and trying to see if this is something for themselves or not. what do you think, or what can we caution them about? What do you feel are the things that they might be facing, some of the challenges that they might be facing, especially, by the way, in Lebanon, considering, everything that has been happening from a pandemic to an economic disaster?
Right. In the Middle East in particular, and very specifically in Lebanon, I would have to add to this particular list the concept of resilience, because Lebanon has never been a stable country, and by not being resilient, the challenge would be much, much bigger. So resilience is a very important attribute, if I may say, that will allow individuals with startups to actually continue and pursue the journey. In Lebanon, there will always be obstacles at many levels. So expectations need to be realistic, and people ought to also expect a lot of bumps at multiple levels, whether it's financial or practical, political, logistical, and other types of challenges that, it's a list that we cannot probably end, because it's a very long list. Lebanon nowadays particularly is going through a very difficult period, and the challenges today have increased drastically since 2019. And I believe that it might be a bit difficult, you correct me if I'm wrong, because this is your field, that one of the biggest challenges today is maybe to acquire funds. I'm not sure how difficult or how easy it would be to convince individuals who are willing to invest, or companies are willing to invest in businesses that are starting up in Lebanon. I'm thinking out loud, because I would also like your input on that, but I would expect that it might be more challenging nowadays than it was maybe 5 years ago.
It's definitely extremely challenging. I think, there are already a lot of challenges when you are starting up a business. You have to be solving the right problem through your company. You have to have a big market. So basically, yes, okay, we have a product, but who's going to buy it, and how many people are going to buy it? Are we talking 100,000 or 10 million or 300 million, or is it a global product? So obviously, all of these decisions factor in when somebody is making an investment. Do they have the right team? Do they have the right talent, the right expertise? Are they able to execute? So there are a lot of obviously questions. And yes, throw into that the situation in Lebanon, with all of the uncertainty and and the political uncertainty as well on top of it, then it's definitely challenging. There's one ray of hope, I think, which is the availability of talent in Lebanon. And I see that some startups, especially in the GCC, have a presence in Lebanon and have an office there. I think that's positive. But to be there fully, I would imagine is quite challenging at this point in time. And you have to be mentally very resilient, to be able to jump into this.
Right. Yes, I mean, I'm sure that the challenges that most entrepreneurs would face would need this resilience in order to step over and move forward, because in Lebanon, if something can go wrong, it will probably go wrong.
So how do we build this resilience? I mean, it's this word that we use. Some people love it in the context of Lebanon because we say we're resilient people. We always come back. Some people hate it because they say, we don't want to be resilient. We want to be able to live. So what is this resilience? How do we nurture it?
Well, if I were to give an analogy, which would be easy and simple to understand, resilience, I would compare it to a branch of a tree, which is in the middle of a storm. And it's the ability for that branch to actually tilt without breaking, and basically eventually after the storm to get back into the original posture it was. So it's the ability to adapt to rough circumstances without breaking. Now, this is often acquired. Of course, there is definitely also an innate component, but people can actually learn to become resilient. And if some people, didn't know how to do that, they can actually reach out to professionals to help them better perceive situations in a less negative and a more positive way in order to readjust their behaviors and cognitive mindsets to avoid the tendency to be helpless or hopeless in such difficult storms.
This is beautiful. I love the analogy that you've used, and I want to hear more. I want more tips from you. So how do you? I mean, okay. So you said that you should talk to a professional. Obviously, we have you here. We're not gonna keep you for 5 hours, but if you give us maybe a few more minutes on this, because I believe it's very important. So you said you don't want to feel. You want to learn not to feel helpless.
Right.
What else can you do?
Right. The concept of giving up and reaching a level of demotivation that might allow someone to stop and to lose hope is what we refer to in psychology as the concept of learned helplessness, which means that when a person is subjected to multiple stressors for a long period of time, and when the factor of uncertainty is very big, especially in Lebanon, I'm going to say, not necessarily in the Middle East, but in Lebanon. This uncertainty and this unknown are often interpreted as negative, as a negative outcome. So over and over the years, people might become conditioned, in that sense, I mean learned, conditioned to believe that things cannot get better. And then they will start developing a sense of hopelessness, a sense of helplessness. In order for someone to be able to withstand this chronic stress and to get up on their feet, they need to learn how to be resilient. From a cognitive perspective, one needs to learn how to differentiate between thoughts based on facts, evidence-based thoughts, from thoughts that are based on emotions or intuitions, because intuition and emotions are not very scientific, whereas evidence-based thoughts are more empirical because they're based on facts that happened previously. Also, behaviorally, a person ought to continue applying certain changes in their lifestyles to continue in this journey versus stopping and giving up and failing. Because as I understood that in this field, the entrepreneurship world, the possibility of failing is common, like I think you said, and people need to get back on their feet frequently.
That's very true. There's a famous saying that says fail fast and fail often and fail fast. So it's a matter of allowing yourself to make mistakes as an entrepreneur, but then bouncing back pretty quickly. And I think the problem happens when you don't bounce back and you get stuck in the failure, or in believing that you are a failure because the venture that you're working on did not succeed. And I think that's quite common. There's a lot of mental issues, by the way, or mental health issues when it comes to entrepreneurs. There are numerous studies about it. There's suicides. It gets pretty ugly. It's quite lonely. So it's very important to have these mechanisms basically to cope under all that stress.
Yes, I believe also that the fact that maybe standards tend to be set high, if I'm not mistaken, and maybe this is a competitive domain that individuals in this field might put too much pressure on themselves, that they might actually break if they didn't maintain a certain work-life balance in order to make it and to be able to reach this after the long journey, not to kind of like start by sprinting at first and end up stopping in the middle. So this is a long-term process, and then people need to be able to get there, not necessarily fast, but to get there. So yes, so it's important to pace, I believe, one's life and to deal with their symptoms and signs, which we can discuss if you want, when they arise.
Tell us, how do you know that you have an issue? Like, at what point, for everyone who's listening at the moment, who is having difficulty waking up in the morning, or difficulty sticking to the plan or being disciplined, how do you know that there's a problem? And let's start with, how do you know that there's a problem?
Right. Well, I always answer this question the same way, meaning that we all go through difficult phases in our lives, and we're not necessarily always doing great, but that's expected because we're human beings, we're not rocks. And as long as this is not affecting our functionality, then that's okay. It is expected that each and every one of us would go through a difficult period with symptoms that might affect them for a short period of time, let's say. But when some of the symptoms, which I will list, are there for a long period of time, and that a bunch of symptoms together as a group are present at the same time, and the functionality of the individual is compromised, then this is when there should be like a red flag, and that maybe a person needs to seek support and professional help. Very often, what we see, especially at the clinic, because we do see individuals who come to us for support, not necessarily because they're mentally ill, which is a misconception that clinical psychologists and psychotherapists work only with mentally ill individuals. As a matter of fact, at least half of our clients are not mentally ill, but they're going through a rough time. They tend to describe problems with eating, with sleep, with fatigue, with concentration and memory challenges. So these are four very common presentations or complaints. They tend to say that we're not sleeping well, and the appetite is either very low, or they're basically binging on food, or they forget to eat. That makes it even worse. Fatigue is very common. Individuals sometimes forget to eat if they're busy all the time, and they basically don't have the energy to continue working. And concentration and memory are very important, because we need those in order to be productive. And when the cognitive functions such as memory and concentration and focus are challenged, then we're not able to use our brains basically. And in order to fix that, certain behavioral tips and techniques need to be respected. So it's important for individuals to watch out for those, and to try and, with a professional, to work on them. Common tips that are across the board are trying to sleep at the same time every night, and to wake up at the same time in the morning, even on weekends. Avoid substances, which is also very common when people are extremely stressed out. They might actually revert to substances in order to find an easy and fast way to calm down. Avoid a lot of caffeine during the day. Eat properly, so basically follow a healthy eating hygiene. Exercise, of course, whenever possible. I know that's a lot when someone is in a startup, because they probably would need to focus and to put all their energy and time and work. But like I said earlier, it's they need to be in it for the long run. So if they start by forgetting those healthy tips, they will probably not make it.
Absolutely, you definitely need to eat and sleep and exercise. I think this is very important. People forget about it, but when they do, it comes at a heavy cost, as you
Exactly.
just highlighted. And it's important that we make time for this. Absolutely. So I want to maybe ask you something that I believe is important, and which is bias, especially when it comes to women. So a lot of people talk about women entrepreneurs. I don't like to say women entrepreneurs. I like to call them entrepreneurs because that's what they are. They're business women, businessmen. And I believe that especially in our part of the world, it's even harder for a woman to start a business, because I feel that, you know, the expectations for her to have a career aren't really there. And if nobody expects you to do something, what is your motivation or your drive to actually do it? So I feel that it's even harder for her, like from the get-go, just before she walks out of the door. Do you see this, by the way, in Lebanon?
Well, I would like to compare this a little bit to clinical psychology and psychotherapy, which is a world dominated by women. And being a male therapist, we are not very, very common. Now this is increasing, so we have more and more male therapists. But
really, I never knew that. So there's more
yes,
female therapists. Okay.
correct. When I
Why?
started
Because we
working
have more empathy.
when I started working 15 years ago, I was maybe one of the 5 therapists in Lebanon, maybe, or maybe one of the 10 therapists in Lebanon, a male therapist, I mean, and most of the others were primarily women. So that's also a misconception that basically this is gender biased. As a matter of fact, there is absolutely no difference between male, females, and gender neutral individuals to succeed in the entrepreneurship world. But I do understand, and I do see the fact that in the Middle East, particularly in Lebanon, because that's where I work, and like you said, that very often not only are they not encouraged to start businesses as women, but they're also sometimes negatively criticized. Things such as this is not for you, that you're not going to be able to do that. What you should be doing is taking care of your family, and so not just not encouraged, but also maybe pushed down.
Deterred.
Right, exactly. So that basically that affects their personal self-esteem, and if someone has a dream that they would like to reach, then if this is crushed, that's very sad.
So how
So
can
in that sense, I'm sorry, in that sense, this is where I described initially the acquired, if you want, like the acquired aspect, which can be, acquired positively or negatively depending on the experiences. So in this case, such experiences, even for women who are positively predisposed to become entrepreneurs, where the experiences might actually let them down and affect them negatively, and then they might not get there. So this is why it's important also to keep in mind that experiences in our lives, especially in childhood, play a big role in one's mindset and self-confidence to venture in such a difficult and competitive world, the entrepreneurship world.
So again, what are your tips for women or anyone actually from maybe an underprivileged, let's say, or I don't know, part of society, or someone who's not typically seen as an entrepreneur, but someone who has these tendencies and wants to get into this field? How do they stay, mentally resilient? How do they not listen to naysayers and push ahead?
Right. I mean, I'll probably revert that question to you since you're a female entrepreneur. But at the same time, I would like to add that education is very important, especially for parents. And I would like also to make a small comparison, or maybe like to use this example in order to explain a particular point, which is the fact that maybe 2-3 decades ago, parents would encourage their kids to study one of the 4 traditional classical professions, which are medicine, pharmacy, engineering, and law. Today, these professions are no longer in the same place. So there are so many new professions that we never thought that they will ever exist, and they are thriving and very popular. And a lot of individuals do not want to study medicine or become attorneys or lawyers. So so the mindset of parents needs to change, and this is where the education with respect to their children, if they were to be female, needs to change, because they need to be educated of the fact that different individuals have their own personalities, their own preferences, and their own choices in life. So maybe you can tell us, Lulu, since you're a woman who is an entrepreneur, if you did face any challenges when it came to choosing this path.
Yes, I did face. I faced a lot of challenges. Actually, I don't come from an entrepreneurial family. My parents. My mother is a stay-at-home mom. My father is a traditional accountant who's been an accountant for years and years and years. So I definitely didn't have the predisposition, and that's why I was trying to ask you, what is this predisposition? So for me to be able to understand more. But I think I always wanted to, for some reason, the corporate world wasn't just doing it for me. I wasn't maybe able to find the right fit for what I wanted to do. And I decided that in order for me to achieve what I wanted, the best way to do it is to create, my own opportunities. And that's why I decided to become an entrepreneur. I definitely had support from my husband. I think having support from somebody in your family is important. But I think that people don't take you seriously. I think initially as a woman. Obviously, it depends on your background and your track record and all of that. So if you are a young woman, maybe some of the people in the audience, I think it's quite challenging. But again, it's what you do. You have to walk the talk and deliver and execute, and then slowly but surely people start taking you seriously. But it's not. I think it's not easy for a woman on a lot of fronts.
Yes, maybe you'd have to fight even more than men.
Yes, I believe so.
Yes.
I believe so. So tell me, let's talk about then a little bit about the types of people maybe that you see. Do you usually typically sit with entrepreneurs or leaders or people in very kind of
Sure.
high performing jobs?
Definitely. Very often there are some overlapping features, as a matter of fact, between individuals who are entrepreneurs or who are competitive, and they're very ambitious. The personality types that we tend to see are perfectionistic individuals, people who are hyperthymic, meaning that they are, let's say, energetic most of the time, individuals who are meticulous, individuals who set high standards, which sometimes is not necessarily a good thing. As long as the standards are realistic, then yes. Individuals who follow certain principles and values, and who are over analytical. The problem is when these individuals face a big challenge with this particular makeup, it might actually be counterproductive because it tends to be a little bit against the concept of resilience. A resilient individual is more flexible, more lenient, more malleable, whereas individuals who are competitive and who are perfectionistic and who are who like the need to be in control tend to do poorly when there is a big change, especially if the change is compromising their sense of control. So, and they tend to, present to us with anxiety, sometimes depression, sometimes negative thoughts, and like you mentioned, some people think in a black or white fashion. So to them, either things should work, or then there is no point in continuing to live. And so this is where our job comes in, to try and let them perceive situations from a less negative, more positive, and more objective perspective, and to help them adjust their behaviors so that they become more resilient and more flexible, so that they don't break the next time this happens, because it's common that that will happen.
That is a great insight, actually. So people that are perfectionists, they're meticulous, and they want everything to go a certain way, are not very resilient. This is very interesting.
Right. I mean, it's possible that some of them already have the skills, but very often, I will use the word just to just to make it a little bit more understandable. The inflexibility that individuals, like some, not all, of course, will make them deal poorly with changes, and in that sense, they would probably lack the resilience that they ought to have.
Okay. Okay, so then the common symptoms, basically, when you're talking to entrepreneurs or these leaders, is that they feel depressed, or they feel that they want to quit, or what is it typically?
Right. Like I was mentioning earlier, this concept of learned helplessness, which is basically a result of continuous and chronic long-term stress, and the difficulty to overcome obstacles, might, in certain cases, for some individuals, make them reach this level of no longer believing that things can go well for them. And then that's what we call learned helplessness. Very often what happens is that because they are a little bit inflexible in the way they think, it's challenging at first to help them realize that there are different angles to perceive the same situation, and to try and use a different angle to approach certain things, because to them, they have a particular rigid belief system that they believe in religiously, and they would not easily accept to take another angle or another way.
So they feel that the world is conspiring against them, basically. Or no?
In what sense conspiring?
I'm trying to understand learned helplessness. I'm trying to understand.
No, learned helplessness is basically when a person reaches a point where they start believing that nothing is going to help them, because this has been repeated multiple times. So they are now conditioned. They learn through a repetition of experiences that they start believing now that nothing can help them. So that's what we call learned helplessness. And also a very common emotion that I tend to see in individuals from this particular group is the emotion of anger. Yes, a lot of individuals seek our help and support when they are anxious, and that's very common, especially that the uncertainties are very high and the risks that they're taking are also very big. But also anger is a very common emotion, and depression is often explained by anger directed inward. So a lot of people who also have anger directed inward towards themselves might actually do poorly in resolving certain issues, whether it's behaviors, thoughts, beliefs, and they might actually end up suffering from clinical depression, let's say. So anger is a big one as well.
And they're angry because they can't control things, or they're angry because that's why?
That's one of them, because of the common personality traits that I mentioned: the perfectionism, the urge to be in control, the being over analytical, the competitiveness, something that sometimes is referred to as this type A personality, right? This is what sometimes we hear. And a certain image that they would need to maintain, an identity basically. If it's broken, then if they're not very flexible, they actually might feel like the world is crumbling. And as a matter of fact, individuals with such traits and characteristics tend to do well in the business world and their career. But if they're not resilient, and this is a double-edged sword, then they will break more easily when any storm, like even a minor storm, would arise. This is why there should be a balance between those traits and criteria and the ability to be resilient at the same time.
Great. So I'm gonna ask Maha or Reem just to let me know if we have any questions to address them. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue the conversation, but I just wanted to stop for a few minutes and check.
Yes, if someone has a question, please go ahead and drop it in the Q&A, and I will let you know. So far, no one asked anything, probably because they thought they didn't have the chance. Go on.
Okay, so please, everybody who's listening, I'm sure you have a lot of questions, as I do. So I think it would be really nice if we can address some specific concerns that you may have. I don't know who is in the audience exactly, so I don't know what your specific challenges are, but definitely would love to get your questions if you are facing specific challenges that are obviously business related. So please drop us your question. Okay, so are there any tips that you can incorporate in? Okay, so you hear a lot about, for example, things like meditation or certain rituals, let's say, that you can incorporate in your life so that you are maybe more at peace or calm. You know, a lot of people tell me you have to do yoga or meditation. I've never done it. What do,
Right.
are these
Right.
helpful?
I mean, different things work for different people. It's not like there's this one formula that fits everyone, but it's common practice for people to meditate, to practice mindfulness, to practice yoga and other relaxation techniques in order to help their mind and body relax and reset, because the energy, which is might usually be high because of the passion maybe individuals in the entrepreneurship world have, needs to be consumed and processed so it doesn't work against them, because the passion and the energy that an individual has can actually backfire if it's not used in its healthy, in its healthy ways. So these practices that you just mentioned might be ways to diverge this high energy into the healthy direction for someone to be productive without being overwhelmed.
Is it maybe because it's a way to get you in a routine? I mean, is getting in a routine a positive thing in general for you as an entrepreneur, someone starting something new, ambiguous, anxiety maybe? Does that bring some stability maybe in life?
Right. I mean, we always preach a routine in the field of mental health, and it's sometimes challenging for someone to follow a routine on the long term. People tend to try, but with our world today, the virtual world, that's a bit challenging because there are different practices that we do on a day-to-day basis that maybe we didn't do 20 or 30 years ago, because the world now is online, so everything's online, so people can do anything they want anytime they want from any place they want, and that might be a variable that could confound, if you want, or it can actually shake their routine, or they wish to follow a certain routine.
Yeah, practices like waking up in the morning, looking at your emails, and you know, seeing that there's a catastrophe that happened while you were sleeping. I'm sure that would not put you in a in the best
or
mood.
Basically, if they wake up at night to drink water, then they would check their emails, and then, you know, in the middle of the night, and then, you know, this can drag for a couple of hours. So the routine will be shaken.
Okay, so you discussed, we talked about the pressures, the anxiety. We talked about the importance of having a routine. We talked about the importance of realizing the symptoms and realizing that it's time to act. What about things like, for instance, I'll tell you from my experience. One of the most difficult parts of starting a business is obviously people and managing people. You need to have the right partners who are critical to your success. I mean, the top 3 reasons why startups fail, it's typically because the partners disagree and fight, and the startup eventually dies. And so you always have to constantly be managing different egos, different people. Not everyone is equipped to have these difficult conversations. I tell you, when I went into it, I certainly wasn't. I think it's quite challenging. So do you have any, again, tips for the people that are listening on how maybe to deal or prepare, let's say, for a difficult conversation?
Right, yes, of course. It's very important, first of all, to try and control one's impulsivity and try as much as possible to distinguish between personal matters and the professional matters. Sometimes matters can be personal, but most of the time, not necessarily. It's also probably helpful to consult with another individual or another colleague regarding, approaching a particular individual with whom they're going to have a difficult conversation. Maybe sleeping on it for some time before actually confronting a certain individual. Writing it down, maybe recording it, by audio or video, and maybe set a list of what to expect from the individual as a response in order to be ready to answer them. But different people have different personalities and different styles, and some people might be more compatible, even if the conversations were to be paradoxical or confrontational, while others might tend to seem rough or tend to seem rude even, and then it might end up with a negative vibe. But like I said, if someone were to have a difficult conversation, like as if, for example, needing to fire an employee, or to actually maybe reprimand somebody, or have a conversation which is difficult, it's better if they were to, if they could prepare it and take the advice of other colleagues as well.
When you and I first had a chat, you talked about the anticipation of a certain outcome. So the perceived basically outcome and versus reality, what actually happens. How important is it for us to control this narrative? Basically, if I do this, something really bad is going to happen, for example.
We all set certain expectations, and we anticipate certain events, but sometimes we anticipate events in a distorted way, and reality ends up being totally different. So the way a person might perceive a certain outcome, they might anticipate a certain result or outcome, which can be, for example, catastrophized, whereas in fact, catastrophized in their mind, I mean, and whereas in fact, this could be a distorted way of perceiving the situation, and that when the situation is there, the outcome might be totally different, and they might actually be positively surprised. But yes, it's true that very often there is this anticipatory anxiety about doing certain things in life that include a lot of risks, a lot of challenges, and a big amount of uncertainty.
Okay, another thing I faced as well is managing expectations. I wanted to ask you, why do people overpromise and underdeliver, especially in the context of business?
I'm not very sure I understood the question, actually.
So sometimes, for example, I give you a very common, let's say, situation that entrepreneurs often have to deal with. So, for example, they prepare a business plan, they go and they start talking to investors, and then or other even people that they want to hire, other stakeholders. But let's take the investor example at this point, and then you would talk to them, and then they would say, you would have, let's say, a positive response, and then you won't hear from them anymore, for example. So for you as an entrepreneur, this becomes a very unbearable situation where you're stuck in between, what do I do? Do I keep persisting? Do I just let it go? And then, in a lot of cases, nothing ends up happening as a result of this conversation. So I feel that, I don't know if it's an Arab thing or something that's specific to our region, but I do feel that people do that quite a lot here. And I was wondering if you had an opinion on this.
I'm not sure I have an opinion on that, but I would try and think about it out loud with you. Is that maybe Lebanon in particular is a very volatile country, so things change very fast, and sometimes opportunities arise in different places of the world outside the country where people feel that there is more stability and more consistency. So there is a possibility that they might actually be interested in a particular position, but they end up worrying that in a startup there is this high level of volatility, in the sense that this is a starting up company, and then maybe they would need something a little bit more firm, a little bit more consistent or stable. But I'm not sure there is necessarily a psychological explanation to such behaviors.
Okay. It's not about power, has nothing to do with power or image or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, some people might have, of course, I mean, it's a case by case thing, but some people might have inflated self-esteems, and some people might be on the narcissism spectrum. Some people, different personalities can explain different behaviors, and maybe one word during the conversation could, push them, away from accepting or deciding to join, because of their mindset as maybe competitive slash narcissistic. Maybe some individuals, of course, with a certain self-esteem that might be a little bit overinflated, that they actually might be threatened, let's say, and that they actually might go to another place.
Okay, so as we're nearing, I think, the end of our hour, I just wanted to ask you if you'd like to wrap up with any, tips or any advice for people that are starting up on this journey, specifically people in Lebanon.
Basically, like I just did, it's like take a deep breath, right, and look at this on the long term, and set reasonable expectations. Try to stay open and flexible, and to learn from failure, and to maintain a healthy work-life balance, because this is what will allow a person to withstand all the stress, the storm that I mentioned, and to continue and pursue their goals, this promise that they have in their mind, and this dream and vision that they want to reach. And every time a person fails, they need to try and find a way, whether alone or with the support of friends, family, or experts, to get back on their feet and to continue the journey, or to start a new journey, basically.
Do you find it acceptable in Lebanon at this point in time that people seek a professional expert to help them, or is it still frowned upon?
Right. Well, no, I mean, I'm a clinical psychologist, so basically I see individuals, even though they're not necessarily all mentally ill, but struggling with symptoms, which could either be due to a difficult phase they're going through or due to a particular psychological disorder. So a lot of individuals who are not necessarily suffering from symptoms, but they're going through phases of confusion, feeling lost, feeling disoriented, might benefit from business coaches, life coaches, who work more often with individuals who are not struggling with symptoms, but who need someone to guide them in the right direction.
Okay, but in general, then it's not frowned upon anymore. It's definitely acceptable.
It's definitely much more acceptable. A lot of individuals even show pride in having their own therapist or life coach, and they
Okay.
but there are other individuals also who might still look at this as a weakness. But and that's not only so in the Middle East, because I've had clients from the West as well, and some of them were actually concerned about confidentiality and privacy, which obviously is very basic in our practice, more than a lot of Middle Easterns. But it's definitely more acceptable nowadays than it used to be a couple of decades ago.
I think it's definitely needed and encouraged. I can speak from a personal experience. Speaking with someone in tough times is extremely helpful, and definitely needed. So if anybody is having any symptoms or any issues, don't hesitate, I think, to approach somebody, because you don't want to deal with everything on your own.
Right.
That's for sure.
Right. I mean, sitting with an individual who's somebody one doesn't know, who's not related to the person, who's objective as much as possible, who's an expert in the field, and who's not judgmental, it's very helpful, because it's a conversation taking place between two individuals, setting particular goals and trying to work on reaching those goals, and also trying to fix certain unhealthy thoughts, unhealthy behaviors, and it's basically two people thinking together to actually get over certain challenges, rather than a person doing it on their own.
Absolutely. Okay, Dr. Naufal, I would like to thank you very much. Maha, if there's anything else you'd like to add, or if there are any questions at all that we can address before we wrap up. Otherwise, it's exactly 1 hour, so I think we can wrap up. Let me know, Maha.
Lulu, there are a few questions. I'm not sure if you received them.
No. Oh, yes. Wait, sorry. Trying to juggle different different. Oh my God, that's a very long question. Okay, sorry, I just saw this. So let me see. In the matter of work-life balance, giving that with entrepreneurs, the balance is often in favor of work. Are there burnout warning signs, and what are the best ways to deal with burnout to get back to work? So I think we
covered that.
We spoke about some of this. Yes. Yes.
Right. I mean, burnout is definitely an expected outcome sometimes. Hence the reason why I was promoting and encouraging a balance, because we need to, and entrepreneurs need to be in this on the long term. And it's like as if you're running too fast at the beginning, then you're going to get tired and burnt out too soon. And then if some of the symptoms that I mentioned earlier are there, they can be treated, and it would be unhealthy to actually allow those symptoms and signs to persist while knowing that they can be treated and the person can be relieved of them.
Yeah, there's this question basically in relation to for people that have a lot of responsibilities on their shoulders that want to become entrepreneurs as well. I mean, how do they how can they do it?
Maybe you want to clarify the question. I'm not sure I understood it.
So for some people that already have a lot of responsibilities in their lives in general, right? And they want to become entrepreneurs. So it's obviously a challenge.
Sure. I believe that you know, there's a big portion of one's energy, time, that is taken by the work aspect if they want to become entrepreneurs, and that the calculations need to be done very wisely in order to be able to maintain a somewhat healthy life outside the entrepreneurship circle, because the question is basically saying that a person who already has a lot of responsibilities. So I'm not sure what they mean by responsibilities, but let's say someone who's married with kids, or someone who who's responsible for someone else, like their parents, or maybe that's not what they meant, but I'm trying to imagine what this could be. Then yes, this needs to be calculated wisely, because starting a business will require a person to spend long hours, and this can actually cause the person to be drained and not be able to give on the other side. So this needs to be studied well before a person steps into this venture.
I think it's just my point on this as well is that it's very important that expectations are managed from the beginning with your partners and your family. I think a lot of people underestimate how difficult it is to start a business, and that almost nothing goes on plan, and there's a lot of curveballs that come our way. So I think your partner, spouse, kids, whatever family member, parents, whoever you're supporting needs to be aligned and needs to understand, because if they don't support you, then obviously you're going to have a very, very hard time. And I did mention earlier, one of my biggest supporters was my husband. And if it wasn't the case, then I don't know, I would have definitely struggled a lot. What is your... Okay, so how can you separate your business plans and your mental stability while doing that, and your personal life aspects, financial, familial, and all the pressures in your life, since there is an inherent connection between these things? So how to balance that out?
Well, I guess, like we said earlier, that being organized, disciplined, following a certain routine, and trying to stick to the plan. So, planning the journey and sticking to the plan, and to make sure that one is able as much as possible to juggle between the two worlds, in order not to basically omit certain responsibilities, or create any conflicts or frictions with, let's say, a spouse. I would expect that individuals who venture in startups and want to become entrepreneurs, they could possibly have more discords with their partners and spouses because of the lifestyle that they would be leading and having in this particular arena. So I would expect that a lot of partners would have problems in their relationships, and that it's very important for the second partner to know very well what their entrepreneur partner is actually going into.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the last question. I mean, there are some more questions, but I'm going to choose one and close out. How can you learn to stay motivated?
Right. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, the basic concept of the behavioral aspect of psychology is that action precedes motivation. Very often, we tend to believe that one day we'll feel motivated, and then this is when we can start to take initiatives. It doesn't work that way. So it's as if you're going to the gym, and then you're expecting your body to totally change after one session. It doesn't work like that. You have to go, and so you have to go every day and put in a little bit of effort, and then you might not notice the change between day 1 and day 2, or between day 2 and day 3, or between day 1 and day 3. but you will notice a big change between day 1 and day 30. But that's because one took the initiative to actually go to the gym in this case. The fact that they took initiative, so they took an action, will end up showing them results, hopefully. And those positive results, which is after a month of working out, let's say if I were to use the analogy of the gym, they would feel motivated because of the outcome. And that's what we call in behavioral psychology like a reward. Basically, when someone becomes positively encouraged and rewarded by an outcome, they would tend to repeat the action again because the outcome was positive, or they would repeat a similar action because the outcome is positive. So action tends to precede the motivation. So basically, when someone doesn't feel motivated, they need to start taking action, and then motivation will follow.
I love this. This is such a great way to end. So action precedes motivation. All you need to do is just do it and stick to it.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Naufal, and have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. And again, thank you, Maha, Reem, thank you, Lulu, for moderating this. And great job, Talal and Madiha, Zain, iPark, right? It's an innovative park group. Thank you so much. Innovation.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Naufal. Thank you, Lulu.
Course, my pleasure.
And
thank you very much.
Thank you, Reem, for hosting the session. And Lulu, hope to see you soon. Also, Dr. Naufal, take good care, and thank you for taking the time and being with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Of course,
okay, have
my
a
pleasure.
good night.
My pleasure. Good night. Bye-bye.